This is an amazing turnout. This is a historic moment in Night Owls because the tables have been turned. And I will be being interrogated instead of being the one doing the interrogating. That's never happened before in Night Owl's history, which is about 7 years old. And so, but let me just give you a rundown of what's going to happen. We are going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes. And then we'll have a break for cookies. And also, if you want to buy a book, and if you want me to sign your book, that'll be out there. We'll do that during the break. There'll be cookies and hot chocolate. Then we'll come back, and that's your turn to ask questions. That will last till like close to 11. Then we'll all go home. Okay, one more. Oh, another thing. This is not a class. So you can leave at any time, and you can come back at any time. Okay, before I turn the floor over to my interrogatrix, I just want to tell you who this is. This is Zena Hitz. She is one of my oldest and dearest friends, and we met at the University of Chicago when I was a little undergrad, and she was an important grad student in social thought. And we took a Cicero class together, and we translated together in her apartment. And she fed me food with a lot of garlic in it. And we've been friends ever since. And she now teaches at St. John's. And she runs something called the Catherine Project, which is like a kind of little intellectual seminars for people who want to keep learning after they leave school. Okay. Oh, and this is about my book, Open Socrates, that I wrote and that just came out. And Zena's going to be asking me questions about it.
Thank you. I'm going to move this a little closer to me. Thank you, Agnes. What she said is true. She left out one detail that I think is key for this moment. I think we'll touch on it in a deeper philosophical way later. One of our great acts of one great moment for our friendship, I remember, was we were once spent several hours in the basement of the Regenstein Library trying to figure out this passage of Aristotle in Greek that described the deepest nature and value of friendship and culminates in Aristotle's argument that real friendship, the best friendship, consists in sharing in discussion and thought. So I'm thrilled to be back and talking.
Citation NE99.
Becker number?
I don't know it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Everyone, she's got a lot of her mind. She just had a book come out. I'm thrilled to be back in this. I've known about Night Owls from the beginning. I think of it as being a hallowed, distinguished place, and all a part of, along with the Catherine Project, with Agnes's book, and with many fellow travelers, we are going to re-spark the life of the mind in our world today. So anyway, I'd like to begin by asking a simple question. Agnes, I'd like to invite you to tell us how you became a follower of Socrates.
I was a high school debater, and I was not good at it. And I was told that you would win more rounds if you put this thing called philosophy into your speeches. You made little philosophy quotes. So I went to the Barnes and Noble, near my house, and I got one of each philosophy book to read them for quotes to put into my speeches so that I would win more. And one of those books was Plato's Republic. I didn't like it that much, actually. I went on and eventually I read them in order. I was like Plato and then Aristotle. I read Kant and Mill and Rawls and Nozick. But actually when I got to Kant was when I was like, this is it. This guy figured it out. He got all the answers. I was actually a little confused why philosophy kept going after this guy Kant, because I just thought he was right. And so I kind of started with Socrates by turning my back on Socrates. I was like, he's just kind of a guy who has questions, and he came up with this like very weird theory of this city where you have to lie to everybody. And there was this much better guy, Kant, who was like, don't lie to people. And so that was my introduction to Socrates, was kind of rejecting him in favor of Kant. But then I took Human Being and Citizen. Some people here are in my Philper class. I love Philper too, but I have to say where I came from and my origin is Human Being and Citizen. And we read the Apology. And I just had an amazing teacher. And she made Socrates seem like a rebel, like dangerous, kind of bad. And that, I think, was the beginning, maybe, of me falling in love with Socrates.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that your book does extremely well, Socrates is a very famous person. Many books have been written about him. One of the things that your book does extremely well is to make him into someone we might not have seen before, to make him seem fresh and new and someone different, although also the Socrates that we always knew and loved. And I think that's a sign of a really good book, is when it helps you to see something that maybe you've always heard about, maybe you've always known about, but it helps you to see it freshly. So part of your account of Socrates is that the primary activity of Socrates, the defining activity of him, is inquiry into what you call untimely questions. So what is an untimely question?
It's a question where you were using the answer to the question before the question ever showed up to you as a question. So you found you kind of always had to assume you knew the answer. It's untimely because it shows up at the wrong time. It shows up after the answer. Questions are supposed to show up before we get the answers, but untimely questions show up to us after we have the answers. And the illustration that I give is from Plato's Alcibiades, where Alcibiades thinks he knows what justice is. And Socrates says, but I've known you since you were a kid. You never didn't think you knew what justice was. I remember when you were just like a little boy and you would be playing dice with other kids and you'd be like, hey, you cheated me. You seem to think you always knew what justice was. So that's the kind of question my book is about. Questions where we find that we have assumed an answer, even though we never raised the question for ourselves.
So this is something I was a little puzzled about, and I just wanted to hear you explain a little more. It seems clear that just if I think of an untimely question as something where I've already started using the answer before I've asked it, there might be quite a lot of quite trivial untimely questions. So I might start driving somewhere without having thought about where I'm going. I might start cooking and then realize in the middle that I had started out to do one thing and I hadn't really asked myself what I was doing. I could be in the midst of really almost any habit and suddenly think, oh, wait a second, why am I doing this? So is there something special about the kind of untimely questions that Socrates asks? Or is it, how do, I feel like I've never read a Platonic dialogue that was about like how to drive to work or how to cook. So what do you think makes the difference? What's distinctive about a Socratic untimely question?
Good. There is the Charmides starts out with maybe a slightly disguised version of the question, how do you get rid of a hangover? Like Charmides has been kind of partying and Socrates is like, I know the way. It's like a special leaf, but there's a charm with it, and it doesn't work unless you say the charm. And like, in this dialogue, I'm gonna help you work out what the charm is. The charm turns out to be understanding what moderation is. So it's a little bit in the vein of like, how to solve a mundane problem. But I think you're right. So I think that our lives are filled with untimely questions that like you're walking to class, right? You've just assumed that you know how to walk to class and you didn't ask yourself the question, how do I walk to class? You were right that you know how to walk to class, right? But you didn't ask it. You're walking. But let's say like all of a sudden, let's say something makes you think you might be screwing up. That maybe this is not the class you're supposed to be going to. Maybe you're oriented wrong on campus. Maybe like it's actually Saturday, you don't have class. What happens at that moment when you realize that? You stop. Like you would stop, right? You'd be like, wait a minute. You might say, wait a minute. And why? Well, because in order to be walking, what was propelling you forward in moving through the campus was your thought that you knew what you were doing, walking to class. And the minute that you feel uncertain about that, you can't walk anymore. You have to stop walking. And now the question's not untimely anymore. And now you can just pose yourself the question, okay, where should I walk? What should I do? What should I be doing? You're not using the answer anymore, so you can ask it. It's become liberated. So there are a lot of assumptions like that where we can take a step back, we can stop, and then we can ask. The problem comes with things where we're not really willing to take a step back from them. Like I'm a mother, right? And I never really stopped being a mother. Right now, one of my kids is here, so I'm like officially a mother. But even when I'm teaching my classes, I can never really like step off the mothering treadmill and be like, am I a good mother? How should one be a mother? I'm sort of committed all the time to the thought, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm a good mother. Like I've got this mothering thing under control. So being a mother is not like walking to class, in that like walking to class is something where I can put it on hold. And so Socrates' interest is in the subset of untimely questions that we can't easily put on hold. I'm a good person. I'm a mother. For you guys, I'm a student. Like I think you think of yourselves as student. That's an important part of who you are, of your identity, of what it is for you to like succeed and flourish in the world. Even over break, you're still a student. Even over the summer, that's still how you see yourself. The question like, what is a good student, is not one that you can inquire into dispassionately, detachedly, as though you were not already committed to some answer to it.
Thank you. So, and one of the reasons why I like this framing of Socrates is that it helps to bring to light the thing which is more clear about him, right? More memorable, that he asks the most famous rhetorician in Greece what rhetoric is. He asks Euthyphro why he's prosecuting his father. He asks people extremely difficult questions, and questions which cause a lot of resistance. And at least in Plato's portrayal, I think we're meant to think that resistance is what ultimately leads the Athenians to execute him, or something downstream of that resistance. What makes asking untimely questions so difficult?
I think there's three. He asks people, he picks the right question for the right person. You could call it trolling. He'll ask Lysis, like, do your parents really love you? He's a kid. That's one of the questions. He'll ask Alcibiades, who thinks he should rule the world, like, are you maybe are you more fit to be a slave? He will he asks Charmides, who's kind of famous for his moderation. What is moderation? Okay, so he picks the question that is, in a way, the sore spot for each person, but it's also, and this is the first stage, a question that actually the person tends to find immediately not hard but easy. So Meno, when Socrates is like, what is virtue? Meno will be like, oh, it's easy, Socrates. Anyone can tell you that. Even a child could say, it's no problem to tell you. He says it's easy like 5 times in the course of a short speech. He's like, this is a really easy question. Now, suppose I were walking to class and you're like, how do you get to that class? I'll be like, that's super easy, right? Because I'm going, just follow me. So there's a way in which you feel very confident in having an answer to a question when you're using that. Of course I have the answer, right? And so Meno's like, oh, it's easy, it's no problem, right? And then Socrates will be like, great, okay, so what is it? And then Meno will give a version of the answer. And then Socrates is like, no, it's not quite, like, here's more like the kind of answer I was looking for. And Meno's like, okay, try this. And he tries a few things. And then, so the second stage is like, that he can't answer the question, right? And so, people like Laches and Nicias, these generals, are asked about courage. They think they can do it at first, then they can't do it. But so the first stage of surprise is, it's, why are you asking such easy questions that anyone could answer? Second stage is, I can't answer them. They're impossible to answer. Okay, but the third stage is the really important one. And now is when we move forward and we keep trying. That is, that there's room to move forward on these questions, that we can make progress inquiring into them when our situation with respect to them is neither I have the answer really easily, nor it's impossible to answer. That we can work hard and little by little get closer to an answer, that's like a thing that human beings can do. That, I think, is the real revolutionary act, is at that third stage.
Okay, I'm going to sit with this question for a while because I think it's a really interesting question about why untimely questions are difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and the nature of the resistance to them, is here's just a couple of possibilities. One possibility is that untimely questions are difficult because somehow they're fundamental to us. So that, as you put it, it's your identity. Another possibility is that we have really intense motivations, which shore up certain commitments that we're unwilling to recognize. Now, is it all commitments or all identities that have this kind of resistance, or are there only some? So, for instance, he often talks to people who love power, like Polus, Callicles, Meno, Charmides and Critias, who turn out badly in their future outside the dialogue. Anytus, not a nice person. All kinds of people who seem to have what I might call backward values. They pursue wealth, they pursue power rather than something else. Is it the nature of the object that makes it difficult? Is it the fact that it's fundamental? Are some fundamental stances harder or easier to raise untimely questions about? Is the philosophical life something about which one could raise an untimely question? And would it be difficult in the same way?
Yes, one could raise untimely questions. In fact, it happens in a couple different places. One of them is the Meno, right? Meno's paradox is an untimely question about the philosophical life. Another one is the Phaedo, when Socrates' friends are like, look, maybe arguments don't work, okay? You can just argue and argue till you're blue in the face, but we're never going to actually figure out whether the soul's immortal or not. So those are both instances of untimely questions being raised about the philosophical life. It's not because what they want is bad. It's not because what Polus and Anytus and Thrasymachus and Callicles, for that matter, I don't think Socrates thinks what they want is bad. Power is good. Power is the ability to get what you want. That is, power is the correspondence between what you want and what you do. So the person who has power really does what they want. The problem is when you think power is going to be like money, or having other people be afraid of you. That's not going to get you what you want. What's going to get you what you want? Well, actually knowing what it is that's good. So Socrates thinks that power is knowledge. And so what these people really want is knowledge. They're just confused. But they want a good thing. They just don't fully understand. They're confused. They're ignorant. So it's definitely not that. It's not because they want something bad. I think that there are a lot of different ways to tackle the question. Why are these kinds of questions so trolling? And I think the features that you brought to our attention, which is sort of the emotional investment, that like our identities are staked on them, etc. I think they add up to something which you need to put in that extra thing. The difficulty is that we can't think about them by ourselves. So, and the whole middle part of this book is like bringing up 3 paradoxes that I think are paradoxes insofar as we assume we have to solve them by ourselves. But basically, when you are really invested in some question such that you've already presupposed the answer, then you are insufficient to yourself to inquire into it. That is, you need help. You need someone else to press you and probe you and look for your blind spots and show you that you're not being consistent. And I think it is just really, really hard for us to admit that we need each other, that I can't sit inside my stove-heated room all alone and just figure everything out by myself, and then set myself straight and get myself right, and then walk out into the world and encounter other people from a place of power and self-sufficiency. That's how we'd like to think about ourselves. And the Socratic picture is we are desperate, we are needy, we can't think by ourselves. Like, actually our minds are broken and they don't work and they don't guide us through our lives, at least on the points that are of most importance to us. So I think that one thing that keeps happening in these encounters is that people keep thinking that Socrates is like getting in the way of my thinking. Like he's like pushing my thinking aside or not accepting my thinking or rejecting my thinking, where what he's trying to do is think with them. But when you thought you could think by yourself, when someone tries to do it with you, it feels to you like they're trying to think instead of you. And I think that's the experience that Socrates' interlocutors had. He's showing me up. He's trying to show that he's the thinker in the room and not me. I think that's often what it feels like to be wrong. Like if you went, what's upsetting about being wrong? It's sort of like the other person is the thinker in the room and you're not. You're not a mind, only they're a mind. I think that feels terrible to us. We're really invested in thinking of ourselves as minds, as somebody who is a thinker in the room. And Socrates' thought is, yeah, you can be that, but you need help.
So let me just try to spell this out, and then I'm realizing that I might be too interested in this question.
I've been in your shoes, Zena. I know. I understand.
But okay. So let's think for a second about someone like Meno or Callicles. So Meno, if you remember, this is the University of Chicago. You've all read the Meno like 100 times, right? Okay. You better have. So there's Meno defines virtue first as to rule others, and then to rule, to desire beautiful things and be able to get them. Right? So this is how we know that he is someone who's interested in conventional power, wealth, and office. So the fact that he's in a way not as resistant as someone like Callicles, who wants that thing and also connected to like just all the pleasures that you can get once you have a position like that. So if you've got all the money and you've got all the power, you can do whatever you want. You can just let go your hedonist impulses all the way. So on your view, the reason why I say Callicles is resistant is because even though actually Socrates thinks power is good, and in fact, he's helping Callicles by telling him what power really is. So he's helping or trying to help Callicles get what he wants. But the reason why that bothers Callicles is because Socrates is another person, and it feels like his independent thinking is being impinged on.
Yeah, and that's especially true of Callicles. That is, the whole last part of the dialogue is Callicles sulking and just being dragged along, and he almost saying, "I'm not even really here, Socrates. Okay, I'll say yes if you want me to." Like basically, Callicles feels like you're not validating me. I'm not important. I'm not even part of this conversation.
Right, but he's definitely the most resistant. But
absolutely,
one might think that he was most resistant because he has a taste for a certain kind of pleasure that if he accepts what Socrates thinks, he will have to give up.
If he accepts what Socrates thinks, he will be happy to give it up.
Right. But isn't it, I'm suggesting, okay. Maybe we should let that sit there.
Can I actually say, can I add a thing here? So one thing that my book introduces something I call the Socratizing move, and I've been making that move. And so let me just flag it for you guys. Okay, so there's a kind of famous reductive move that gets made, a lot in the 19th and 20th century. It's associated maybe if you think, oh, Nietzsche, morality is just ressentiment, or like Freud, a lot of stuff that you didn't think was about sex is actually about sex, or Foucault, like everything you didn't realize was a matter of power is a matter of power. This move where something that you didn't think was, something you thought was a lot higher, Girard is like, oh, stuff you didn't think was about like avoiding violence is about avoiding violence. So the thought is, the stuff you thought in your life that was kind of high and noble and elevated and that you respected, actually it's like dirty and low and is reducible to these motivations that you would not want to identify with. Okay. That's it's a common move. You could call it even a reductive move. I mean, you could take this move, and you could also say a lot of scientific analyses of human behavior you might also think of them as reductive. So the format of the move is X is really nothing but Y, right? Something you thought was high is really nothing but this low kind of motivation. Like Hobbes, okay? Everything is just avoiding death, right? Stuff you didn't think was about avoiding death is about avoiding death. So it's not just, it dates back further. okay, Socrates makes a move that's a lot like that move, except it goes the other way. It goes up instead of down. So stuff that you thought was like not that great or remarkable is actually a distorted, twisted image of something that's really awesome and amazing. So like the pursuit of power, right? The desire to rule over the world, like Alcibiades, the opening of the Alcibiades is Alcibiades wants to rule the world. Like if he just rules Athens, not good enough. If he rules Athens and Sparta, not good enough. Because if he rules Athens and Sparta and he can't cross over into Persia, he would commit suicide because that would be such a puny life to only rule over Athens and Sparta. That's not good enough. He wants to rule the world. Okay, talk about power hungry. It's very more explicit in the Alcibiades than any other text. Alcibiades wants to rule the world, and Socrates is like, that's actually beautiful. I love that you want to rule the world because that means you want knowledge. That's what you really want. Socrates thought like he takes, and the last part of my book takes 3 areas of our lives, love, death, and politics, and Socratizes them and says that a lot of our weird and confusing behavior, let's say when it comes to romance and romantic relationships, like the bizarre way we conduct ourselves in relation to breakups. So like here's an example I give in the book. Like if you imagine somebody that was about food the way that we are about romantic partners, like they're banging on the door of a restaurant. They're like, I have to get in. And you go there and you say, this restaurant is closed. And they're like, but I have to eat at this restaurant. And they're like, but these other restaurants are open. No, I have to eat at this one. And you're like, is the food really amazing? No, I hate the food here. That's like someone texting their ex who who they've told you, like, this guy's treated me so badly and like I'm never getting back with him, right? Like if somebody did that with food, we'd think they were crazy. And Socrates is like, why do we do it with romance? Like, why? There are other fish in the sea, right? Why do we drive ourselves insane? Why is love a kind of madness? Somewhere on my pants is written, love is a kind of madness. This is Socrates' sayings that I wrote onto my pants just for you. They're a little hard to read from where you are. I didn't think about that part. Okay, Socrates wants to say, well, love is a sign that we're not actually from this place. We're from another place, and we're following the rules of that other place. And we are trying to ascend to a higher plane of existence. For the details of that argument, read chapter 8. That's the one on love. But so the point is, when these people want power, it's not because they're evil. It's because they're ignorant, and they don't understand that their desire is a twisted and distorted version of a thing that's really genuinely good.
Does how you live matter for what you can understand?
Yes, absolutely. So I think Socrates thinks there are a bunch of ways to live inquisitively. So like here are two big ones I talk about a lot in the book. Don't lie to yourself about weakness of the will, because there's no such thing as weakness of the will. So don't pretend you have it. That's not what's going on. Actually, you're ignorant. Number 2, don't get revenge. Don't ever get revenge. Also, don't get revenge when you call it something nicer than revenge and actually you're getting revenge, like seeking accountability and teaching someone a lesson and giving them what they deserve. Those are all just ways that we dress up revenge. Don't ever get revenge because it screws with your life. It screws with your mind. It screws with your relation to other people. No matter how you're treated, never get revenge. That's an important Socratic principle.
Okay. I'm going to read from this book I really like. It's called The Apology. This passage is...
I brought my book too.
We're at... Oh, shoot. This doesn't have very good line numbers. It's in 29.
Okay.
I think. Oh, here it is. This one has better line numbers. Yeah, it's like 29D or so.
Mm-hmm.
So Socrates is explaining that he would not accept acquittal from the jury if it were on the condition of not pursuing philosophy. And he says, if you offered to let me go on these terms, and it's always just nice to read out these speeches, they're very nice, and it's especially for an event like this. If you offered to let me go on these terms, I should reply, Athenians, I hold you in the highest regard and affection, but I will be persuaded by the god rather than you. As long as I have breath and strength, I will not give up philosophy, and exhorting and declaring the truth to every one of you whom I meet, saying as I am accustomed, my good friend, you are a citizen of Athens, a city which is very great and famous for its wisdom and power. Are you not ashamed of caring so much for the making of money and for fame and prestige, when you neither think nor care about wisdom and truth and the improvement of your soul. Okay, then he says, if there's a dispute about this, he'll cross-examine the person, very much in Agnes's line. Okay. I'm now done at 38. I think that no greater good has ever befallen you in the state than my service to the God. For I spend my whole life in going about and persuading you all to give your first and greatest care to the improvement of your souls, and not till you have done that to think of your bodies or your wealth. And I tell you that wealth does not bring excellence, but excellence, wealth, and every other good thing which men have, whether in public or in private, comes from virtue. And there's an alternate translation, which is I like in a certain way, a little better, 30b. Wealth does not bring about excellence, but excellence makes wealth and everything else good for men, both individually and collectively. So what struck me about this passage, which, I mean, apart from its majestic beauty and inspirational character, is his use of the words exhort, persuade, and that they seem to be substantive claims.
Mm-hmm.
Not why care about money and fame and prestige? Care about wisdom and truth and the improvement of your soul. Wealth isn't what matters. Virtue is what matters. And I wondered how you understood this as part of Socrates' character. So not just Socrates who shows you that you really don't know what you're talking about, but Socrates who has a positive view for your life and is trying to exhort you and persuade you to follow a certain path.
The original title of my book, my title that I was not permitted to use, was Gadfly Midwife. So I think there are two Socrateses. Socrates the gadfly is the guy who refutes everybody, and Socrates is the midwife, is the guy who brings forward positive views. And a big part of what my book tries to show you is those are the same guy. That is, they seem like two entirely different like modes of being and projects, etc. There's a whole chapter of my book devoted to what I call the gadfly midwife paradox. How can those two be descriptions of the same person? Okay, so I want to sort of like acknowledge something, which is that like apology Socrates is the preachiest Socrates we ever get. That is true. He puts his preachy face forward in the apology.
His what? Preachy. Okay.
Preachy, yeah. Like here's what you should do. Here's how you should live. Like he sounds a little bit like an op-ed writer in the apology, and he doesn't sound a lot like that in other places. But it's like
terrible thing to say. How could you say such a thing?
Well, you were the one exhorting and persuading, and here's how you have to do. Here's what you have to live in the new year, new you. Like, it sounds a little like that to me. He's not. So the thing that he's kind of hobbled. He's kind of he has to give a long speech, which he doesn't like doing. Even in the apology, he manages to throw a little refutation in there, right? The conversation with Meletus. But the way that I would frame this is Socrates. So when he says, "I want to persuade you," I hear that in the way that it's fleshed out in the Gorgias and the Crito, namely not. I want to mold you into a certain way, which is the good way to be. But I want to put something before you, persuade or be persuaded. That is, either be persuaded by what I say or show me that I'm wrong. And so I think Socrates' persuasions and exhortations have that character throughout, which is a refutational character. That is, if somebody wants to refute him and to say, no, really, you should care for your body, which is just what Callicles wants to do, Socrates is like, bring it. I would love to hear that argument. And so the thought, like, is he exhorting Callicles to stop caring for his body? Or is he trying to refute Callicles when Callicles insists that I just want pleasure? Both, they're the same thing. I think those are one and the same thing. That is, in order to move away from Socrates, the op-ed writer, what we have to do is just find a way to hear this Socrates as like the other Socrates.
What's the role of virtue in Socrates' project? Is he trying to cultivate virtue? Is he himself virtuous?
Virtue is like the condition which, if you were in it, you'd be awesome. So like, it's awesomeness. It's like it's the best version of you. And
now you sound like an op-ed writer.
I don't even think they use the word awesome that much.
No. It's the best you. That was the point.
Oh, yes. Fair enough.
This doesn't. That sounds like it.
Right. So like what would it take for me to be kind of like the perfect version of me? It's interesting. It's just interesting in itself that Socrates cares so much about that question. Aristotle cares a lot less about that question. He cares about it, but up to a point. But like at a certain point, stop perfecting yourself and start like going out and doing stuff and living your life is Aristotle's thought. That is, he thinks we cultivate virtue for, maybe 35 years or so. And then it's time that you stop focusing on yourself and like go out and act out whatever virtue you've achieved. That's probably how much you're going to get. Time to exercise it. Socrates is like, no, infinite quest for virtue, right? Just forever. And then, you're gonna die, but your soul is immortal. So you'll just keep questing. I think the biggest ethical disagreement between Plato and Aristotle is the soul immortal or not? If you think the soul is immortal, as Socrates does, you can go on infinite quests. If you don't, you're going to have to be like, this is good enough. Let's start doing things. Okay. So virtue is that point that is the kind of infinite attainment point that we're trying to get for Socrates, and where for Aristotle, where it's like, yeah, you want to have virtue, but you want to use it. So that's virtue. I think that there's maybe another thing that's worth me bringing out about this passage. So a big move in my book is to ask the question, suppose we're not asking these important questions about our lives. And so we didn't inquire, like, how should I live? What should I do? How should I live my life? Where do we get our answers if we didn't ask the questions? Like, where do the answers come from? Like, why do I wake up in the morning and like feel like I know what I'm going to do if I haven't asked the questions? And my thought is that Socrates thinks there's two sources of answers that we have. Automatic answers we get for free without asking the question. One is our bodies. Okay, so our bodies just tell us what to do without us asking. And even when we're like, shut up, body, they just keep talking. So they're not, they don't care about us having asked the question. They make commands. The body makes commands. What is a command? A command is like an answer to the question, what should I do, when you never ask the question. That's what a command is, right? So our bodies command us. So they give us answers that we didn't ask for. That's one set of answers. So we get hungry, we get tired, we feel pain, but also we're like trying to secure the resources to satisfy these commands in the future, which is why we care about wealth. All right, so there's the bodily command and all that it commands us to do. Sometimes Plato calls this the appetitive part of the soul. But that's not all. That's not our only source of answers. We got another really important source of answers, which is, I call it the kinship command. I'm stretching the word kinship there. In English, that really means ties of marriage. But I mean the command that addresses you as the member of a group. So like all of you guys have kind of similar expressions on your faces right now that are like the expression that you think you're supposed to have when you're in a room of this kind. Like you are all facing me, like none of you are facing the other way. You're sort of sitting in the same way. You're actually dressed in like roughly similar ways. So you guys have a sense, you've been commanded how you're supposed to sit, how you're supposed to hold your face, how you're supposed to dress. And that command is coming from all the people around you in the groups that you're in. You know how to behave in this situation. You're not going to break the rules, except like when you feel like it, because like there's some group that tells you it's cool to break the rules in that way. But basically, we all follow social rules all the time because, why? Well, in the Socratic picture, because we don't have anything else. I mean, that's the alternative is our bodies, right? So we belong to groups and the groups tell us what to do. We have bodies, our bodies tell us what to do. Those are our two major sources of what to do. And Socrates thinks there's a better way. There's another source of answers to questions as to what should I do? And that is virtue. That is virtue, which for Socrates is knowledge, would be being able to act on actually knowing what you should do, doing a certain thing, not because you were savagely commanded. I call these savage commands. I'm adapting a phrase in the Crito, not because you were savagely commanded by your body or by your kinship group. Yeah, let me stop there.
So, okay, I know we're getting.
No, it's okay. We started late too. Okay. I think we can go another 5 to 10.
Okay.
Based on your thinking.
Okay. So, what does virtue, as you just described it, have to do with, say, courage, moderation, justice, like famous virtues that Socrates talks about all the time?
Yeah. So I think, so one famous thing is that when Socrates analyzes these virtues, they always turn out to be knowledge again. And I think Socrates thinks when you're like rushing into battle on the battlefield. That's a kind of courage. It's a kind of imitation of the real courage. Where does the real courage happen? It happens in a conversation when you're brave enough, when you're bold and brave and inquire. How about justice? Okay, there's justice of giving everybody, paying someone back what you owed them. What about like treating someone's argument justly or fairly? Socrates thinks that's fundamentally what justice is. By the way, this is not in my book. This is something I cut from my book, but since you're asking the question. So I think Socrates thinks that the real home of the virtues is actually in conversation. That is, conversation is first and foremost the place where we exercise virtue. The view that I'm defending in my book is intellectualism, right? Which is to say the goal of life is knowledge, and the fundamental, like, deep structure of life is an intellectual structure. And so on such a view, you should expect that, like, what it is to be a good person is to be a good conversationalist.
So is Socrates virtuous?
I think in that sense, yes.
So Socrates' virtue is virtuous knowledge, and Socrates is ignorant?
Awesome. Okay.
How does that work, Agnes?
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So no. So we need another wrinkle. But it's a great point. There's a passage in the Phaedo where Socrates says there are sort of like true virtues, and then there's kind of like the human version of the virtues. Look, what would true virtue be? What would true virtue would just actually be having knowledge, and then you would always know what to do, and you would exercise the knowledge, and you would never need to talk to anybody. You would not be a conversationalist anymore. You would not be desperate anymore. That's the state we would all like to be in. And what I'm describing when I'm describing the conversational virtues is like the second best, much as he talks about the second best route in the Phaedo. So you're absolutely right. The conversational virtues are, let's say, one level up from the virtues as they manifest themselves in our social lives, but there's another level up above that, and Socrates is not at that level.
Okay. Okay. There's so many questions. Okay. I think I wanted to ask you to say something, because the chapter of the book that I loved the most was the chapter on equality, where you argue that it's in fact a deep human need, not just to have status and not just to be equal, but to have both an elevated status and equality, and that you have that by being invited into shared inquiry. And what I loved about that was, first of all, it's not something you read every day. It's quite unconventional, Agnesian contrarianism, but it also seems very much true, and very much connected to liberal education. So it's something I remember receiving from my teachers. I remember I had a teacher who, in fact, was Agnes's teacher's best friend, weirdly enough. Okay. Who would look me straight in the eye and ask me what I thought about things. What do you think about whether free will is possible? As if I had something to say about it or something to think about it. And it is this incredibly powerful moment was for me. It is now for my students to be looked at and asked to participate in a serious conversation. So I just wanted you to expand on that, if you'd like, given that we are at the University of Chicago and a place of liberal education, and this is our shared profession is liberal education.
Yeah. So the Socratizing move, I use it in like what I call the 3 problem areas of our lives. There are more problem areas, but let's say these are top 3. Romantic love, how we face death, and politics. And then with respect to politics, what I say is that like our liberal ideals, which I take to be 3 parts, liberty, equality, and justice, that like our conception of them is incoherent, but we can Socratize them and make them coherent. Okay. And now we get to equality. Okay. So there's just a chapter on equality. How do we have to Socratize equality? Well, there's this problem, which is that we seem to care about equality. We want to treat each other equally, that we feel like that's deeply important to us. It's deeply important to us that everybody be treated equally, but also we want to be more important than other people, and we want to have status, and we want to we want to be special, and we want to be held in special regard. And in, you can see it in a conversation with people meeting for the first time, where they're like, yeah, I'm pretty important and you need to know who I am for the basis of, so that in the basis of this conversation will be that you recognize that, like, I'm someone to be reckoned with. And in exchange, I'm going to recognize that about you. You're someone to be reckoned with. It's not that people necessarily always want to be above the person they're interacting with, but they want to interact on an elevated plane. Like, we're not just any old people. We're some of the special people. We're some of the really good, really valuable people. Status is the worth that other people accord you, right? So status is how important or good other people think you are. Everybody cares about status, and that's a really good thing. From a Socratic point of view, it would be terrible if we didn't care about whether other people valued us. That would be like the terrible illusion of autonomy and independence and being able to think for yourself that would get you, from a Socratic point of view, stuck sitting in a room by yourself spinning circles. Okay, so we all love equality, but we all want status. And the question is, how can we fit those two things together? And what I do in this chapter is say, look, one way to think about it is like, try to put one of these two things down and say, nobody really wants equality. Anyone who's a real man would know that the thing is just to be above other people, says Callicles, says Thrasymachus, right? Says maybe Nietzsche in certain moments. The thought is, no, we don't want equality. Equality is a sham. What we want is to be as far above other people as we can be. That'd be one possibility. The other possibility would be the sort of like kumbaya moralism of like, no, we all just want equality. Like, we'll just clear away that love of status is a corruption. It's, it's what the elites want or something. But like us good guys, we just want equality. Okay, that I think also doesn't work. We all really want status. It's really important to us. And as I say, it's good that we want it. So, but how do we put these things together? That's the puzzle of the last, no, it's not the last chapter. I moved things around. It was once the last chapter of the equality chapter of the book. And what I say is that there's a way in which we can have equality and status at the same time. And that is in a conversation where the other person treats, well, here's how Socrates puts it. I call for a vote from one man alone. What he's saying is, when I'm talking to you, Polis, even if you're like a lover of power or whatever, a bad guy, even if you're going to, Charmides, you're going to turn out to be a tyrant, whatever. When I'm talking to you, only your opinion matters. Your opinion and my opinion. I'm not like thinking, is this going to be a bad look, this conversation, to the people who are watching it happen? What are people going to report about this conversation later? Do I seem like I'm winning to the crowd? Do I seem like, do I look authoritative? Socrates like, I'm not thinking about any of those things. I'm not taking a vote from like the audience. I'm looking at you, Polis, and I'm looking at whether I convince you, and you are the arbiter over whether I just made a good argument or not. That is to treat Polis's mind as equal to his own. That might sound trivial. You might be like, oh yeah, of course, another person's mind is equal to your own. But we don't generally think that way. We're like, well, my opinion is, and we think we can sort of retreat inside my opinion. And like, there's your opinion, but like my opinion is the main opinion from my point of view. You can have your opinion, but to say you can have your opinion, it's kind of like me dismissing it. And so what happens when somebody is calling for a vote from one man alone? I'm saying like your opinion matters to me. That is, it matters to the question, have I made an argument? If I've changed your mind, I've made an argument. That's the standard for whether I've made an argument or not. You get to say, because there's nothing else here. And your mind is of the same like status, the same rank as my mind. And we're both just getting to be minds for a little while. That is, inside of a conversation, these other commands that we have that we're subjected to, like hunger and thirst and the desire for wealth and the social commands of like fitting into the group and looking good and having people like us, that we can set those commands aside. And as far as the conversation goes, I'm a mind and you're a mind. That's what real status is. That's the kind of status we all long for, is to be treated as a mind, as though that's a thing that we could be. I had a really similar experience with my teacher, who was the best friend of her teacher. She would say, you would say something in class, you'd raise your hand, you'd say something, and then she'd look at you and she'd say, another sentence. And first you feel this terror. You're like, I don't have another sentence. I said what I wanted to say. That was my thought. It's done. But somehow, And the thing is, I've tried it and it doesn't work when I say it, but like she could do it. And somehow, like, because she said another sentence to you, you had a sentence and you say it. And it was like, it's a good sentence. She knew somehow, she could see that like you were a mind, you had something to contribute. And so once we see that that's what it means to respect someone, and that's what it means to treat them as your equal, it also means that you're according them high status.
Yes, I love that. And I also, when you wrote about this after Amy Cass, that's the teacher in question, died, I did start using another sentence.
Does it work for you?
Yeah, I think it does work. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to talk about this.
But anyway, so I'm eternally grateful for you for writing about that and for doing it. Okay, so I think we're running out of time. We've run out of time, properly speaking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something which is a little bit of cheating and give a question to you to say later. Okay, so this I think is an excellent question for someone to ask when it gets turned over. And that is, what happens when shared inquiry fails? Okay, good question. Someone should ask it.
Okay, so
thanks so much, Agnes.
Thank you, Zena. You don't have to clap. We're just gonna be coming back. It's not over. But so let me just tell you what we're gonna do. We are gonna go out into that little area. We are not all gonna fit immediately in that area, so I'm not sure what's gonna happen. We'll do our best. There's gonna be cookies there, and if you want to buy a book, try and come up and you can buy one, and I can sign it. There's also gonna be a little period, let's say from 10:40 to 11, where I'll also sign books in case I can't fit them all in now. And when we come back, everyone who asks a question gets a t-shirt. So I forgot to say that earlier. Okay, so we'll take a break. Okay, questions.
So earlier you talked about like, these questions where like you sort of feel like it's easy and then you like realize that it's actually not easy. But like the questions you're talking about, you can't really pause the activity that you're like trying to figure out.
Exactly.
So my question is like, when you've entered that phase of like, oh, I actually don't really know what the answer to this is. But you like have to continue doing that activity. What do you do in that period between when you like find it hard until when you figure it out? Or like, even if you feel like you will never figure it out, like what do you do with your life in between then?
Great question. Okay, so it's like, how do you live in the light of the realization that you don't actually know what you're doing? A lot of my book is about this question, and I can give you a one-word answer, and then I'll say more. The answer is inquisitively. You live inquisitively. What is it like to live, like, let's say, to conduct, yourself as a daughter or as a wife or as a student when you realize you don't actually know how to do that? And I think, so there's like a couple of different parts to it. One is basically, we can look at how Socrates lives, because this is how Socrates lives, right? He had this realization, and then he still had to go on doing stuff. He had to go on fighting in wars and being a citizen of Athens and conducting his everyday life and being a father and all the stuff that he did. He had to keep living a human life with the knowledge that he didn't know how to live a human life. And so he lived it inquisitively. What does that mean? First part, it means being a hunter for opportunities where you get to talk it through with someone, because you realize those are your only opportunities to make progress. That's one. So it's like you're like jumping on those chances. Like sometimes people ask me, why are you so ready to like answer like anyone's question, like about kind of almost anything? Like when reporters ask you about your personal life, like why do you answer their questions? And it's like, for me, it's like, well, this is my chance. This is my opportunity to learn something. Like no one else ever asked me that question. Right? So to live inquisitively is like to be ready, to be like, okay, I'm on the lookout for opportunities to learn, but you don't always get them, right? So that's the other part. What do you do when you're not in a conversation about that very thing? And Socrates says you live by agreement. which means you don't know how to be a good daughter, right? But what you might have is like a basic sense of like, here are some things that we've all agreed to, and I'm going to stick to them until I can show that any of them are wrong. And I'm going to stick to them even when maybe I don't feel like sticking to them, because I don't have anything but my agreements. And so when Crito wants Socrates to run away from jail and not die, Socrates says, look, I don't have knowledge, but I do know what I've agreed to with the city of Athens, and I just can't break my agreements because that's the closest thing I have to knowledge. So it's like there's like a second best, which is just like the agreements that you've made with people, and you stick to those agreements and you don't break them. And there's a third part. The third part is, remember the part where you said, and maybe you'll never even find out? You don't let yourself believe that. That is, Socrates says, look, I think we're going to be better and braver and bolder if we believe that we can make progress on these questions, that if we believe that it's not even possible to find out and so one shouldn't even bother trying. Paraphrase. Says that in the to Meno. And I think one of the things that Socrates sort of holds on to is the thought, no, we can do this. We can make progress on these questions. And that's part of living inquisitively. So those are the three parts.
I feel like there are a lot of reasons people could be engaged in a dialogue where they're not truly advancing in knowledge and to, lead a more intellectual life, like regurgitating information or, make themselves sound smart. Like, how do you ensure that people are really doing it for the same reason you are, and that being a good reason?
Great question. So, I was going to repeat the questions. There are a lot of ways that people behave badly in relation to knowledge, like just regurgitating it or using it to make themselves look good. And how do you ensure that you or others are doing it in the right way? So the first thing you do is Socratize that. That is when you say, well, when somebody is just regurgitating, what are they doing? They're trying to make it look like they know. Similarly, when you're trying to make themselves look good, they're trying to make themselves look like a knower, as though they were a knower. There's something that person's getting right. They're getting right the thought, it's really good to be a knower. They've fastened on to actually the correct thing. And so in a way, Socrates is like, imitate that person. Be just like that person, except for the part where they're assuming they already know something they don't know. Just subtract that part, and then you're all good to go. So I think if you ask, how do you avoid being the bad kind of knower, the bad kind isn't bad. The bad kind is just an imperfect version of the good kind. And even you, no matter how good you are, you're going to be an imperfect version, because the only perfect version is the actual knower, right? But in effect, I think it's to maybe to view that person in such a way that you are best able to engage with them in good faith, right? That's then you've really got it down. You ensure that you're not that person if you can philosophize with that person. Also, Zena, you should feel free to jump in if you have thoughts. But you also don't have to.
Let's go to the next one. Then I'll pipe in with thoughts.
In the blue shirt, collared shirt.
How does the philosophic right begin? Socrates shares his autobiography in some dialogues, but even though he raises his fundamental question with lots of people, they don't quite begin their own philosophic lives. So what does it say besides the fundamental question?
Many of them do. So, all the characters in the Phaedo, right? They're Socrates' buddies who have been philosophizing with him for quite some time. And one thing we hear from them, from Simmias and Cebes, is that they know the usual Socratic arguments, for instance, the recollection argument, right? So actually, in many cases, these people really do go on philosophizing. We get that feeling about Theaetetus in the Theaetetus. But the question, where does something begin, it's a really hard question. A lot of us, people ask me about this book, when, how did you get started? Or what was the beginning of it? People often asking you where the beginning of it. Aristotle has a great line in the Physics where he says, good, Arnold is here to hear me say this, that there is no beginning to a process of change. That is, there's no first moment of a process of change. Why? Well, in effect, anytime that something is changing, Aristotle thinks, once you pick out that it's changing, it's already changed a little bit. And so that's not the first moment. And if you take like a little moment before then and it's already changing, then you'll be able to find a little moment before that. And so there's something funny and puzzling and hard about first moments. A lot of what we mean by a first moment is a fantasy or something, a retrospective fantasy where we were like, oh, that was the day I started, which is like a little bit like the story I told you about how did I start getting interested in Socrates. Like it's a story, right? But my actual life was like I was slowly processing something and there was no first moment. And so I think it's just really hard to answer, like, where does something begin? But if you want to know what are some important events, right, in a kind of the philosophical life, the important events are going to tend to be sort of important conversations and important kind of like in specifically confrontations with the paradigm or the like avatar of it. And Socrates, I think, serves as that for many people.
Okay, I also had a version of this question, so I'm going to double down on Mr. Baldwin's question. So in the Phaedo, Socrates says, he tells the story of his life, and he says that he pursued natural science, what natural science was in whatever, the 5th century, before turning to the kind of philosophizing we see him do in the dialogues. And what he says is that the types of causes that the natural scientists were seeking didn't seem like good explanations. They didn't seem like the scientists were giving good answers to the questions. So his example is, what explains that I'm sitting? Well, my bones and sinews. And Socrates says, well, look, my bones and sinews also explain my standing. So this is not a good answer. So he gives a kind of a version of what I think among philosophers is a more or less familiar criticism of materialistic explanations of things. That is, they seem to be too flexible. They're not specific enough. So he says he turns from that. And then there's another part in the Phaedrus. Socrates contrasts what he does with what seems to be some kind of like literary criticism. So there's some practice of debunking myths. And so there's a myth that Boreas sweeps a woman off her feet and steals her away by a certain riverbank. And the literary critics are like, we're pretty sure that this was actually just a windstorm that swept away the woman. And Socrates says, look, you could give all kinds of explanations, but it would take you a lot of time. And really what I'm interested in is what kind of being I am. So those are two cases where he's giving a sharp contrast between the kind of place that he comes from and the place that he comes from, which suggests to me that, in fact, it's something, the beginning has to be something like a conversion. So I think I'm going to disagree with Agnes here. As I also, and it goes back to what I was trying to hold her to account for earlier, which is that he doesn't say, and I think it's important that he doesn't say, I was pursuing power and money in the city, and I realized none of that meant anything to me, so I would pursue wisdom. We never see a conversion story from one of these people that you'd call like the baddies of the dialogues, the Meno and the Callicles and so on. So I wonder whether there's something dramatic and maybe more than rational, not rational. I don't know how you would put it. You could probably come back with it. Something that happens that puts you on the philosophical path that's not just something strictly philosophical. So what does it mean to fall in love with wisdom? That doesn't feel like necessarily a being attacked by an untimely question or...
I think there's a dialogue in which we're supposed to watch someone fall in love with wisdom, and it is a conversion story. You see the conversion. Like, it starts with, I am going to pursue power above all else, and it ends with, I am going to pursue wisdom, and it is the Alcibiades.
It doesn't work, though. Don't be fooled.
It doesn't work. No, like,
Alcibiades is like the worst person ever. I mean, amazing,
absolutely.
Beautiful, handsome, dashing, everything great.
Absolutely. But a lot of conversions get unconverted from. That's the way it goes with conversions. You can just keep converting, right? You turn once, you can turn again. Point is, you do see the turn. There is a turn in the Alcibiades. I mean, there's no question about that. And And there's a kind of conversion moment in the Gorgias with Callicles. Okay, it's not a conversion. It's a kind of whisper of Callicles towards the end of the dialogue says, you know, Socrates, I see what you're saying, but the thing that happens to other people has also happened to me, which is that I'm just not fully convinced by you. And Socrates says, it is the love of the many, Callicles, in your soul that is pulling against me. That is, it is the savage command of your kinship group that you are listening to instead of listening to the voice of philosophy, how I translate it. Okay. So I sort of agree with you that if you're a lover of power, there's going to be something that pulls against philosophy. But I think the thing that converts you is philosophy. The thing that Alcibiades falls in love with in falling in love with Socrates is just rational argument and nothing else.
All right.
A lot of hands sprung up after that one.
I'll take the suggested question of what do you do when this type of inquiry fails, and I'll put a small spin on it, which is Socrates seems to have an answer along the lines of sometimes you can't convince people, sometimes people are too feeble, so you feed them myths and stories that will do the trick. He's a myth debunker, but he's also kind of like a myth replacer. And also with like all of us falling in love with Socrates, is it really that we're all falling in love with the Socratic method, or did we fall in love with the beautiful rendering that Plato gave us?
Great. So that lie about no, not you're telling Plato, right? Plato tells it. It's not your problem. It's Plato's problem, but it's Plato's problem, I think, not Socrates' problem. That is, so Socrates. So were you thinking of the noble lie, or you think of the myths at the end of the dialogues?
Everything.
Either
Noble
one.
lie, yes.
Yeah.
Myth of recollection.
Air at the end of the Republic, and the portrait at the end of Phaedrus, and everything.
Got it. Okay. So, so first off, I think Socrates thinks one reason why you sometimes can't convince people of things is that you're wrong. And that's a really important possible reason to keep in mind as to why people are not being convinced by what you say. And in fact, when you're talking to someone, you're calling for a vote from that person alone, which is to say, if you don't convince them, you don't get to walk away and say, look, I was right, they were just feeble or whatever. But they might say something like this, like something like what Callicles says, which is like, you know, you're making a good argument. And like, I see that it's a good argument and I agree with you, but like, I kind of can't bring myself around. That's kind of Callicles' position. Or you might, you know, be at the end of the Phaedo, right? It's time for me to go die and I can't argue about this anymore. And Socrates says, like, what do you do when you can't do philosophy? Like, what do you do when philosophy's over? Because people have to go, because I have to go run away. You know, I have to do other things. The philosophy conversation is over. And you don't have anyone to talk to. Then you might have to talk to yourself. And you might tell yourself a story. And that's how he even puts this in terms of the arguments. You can tell like an incantation. You can say it to yourself. You have to like almost like give yourself a bit of medicine. Do the best you can to treat yourself when you don't have the real thing conversation. And that I take it to be the role of the myths, at least some of the myths. You know, the myth in the myth of recollection as it shows up in the Meno, Socrates tells this story and then he says, that might not have been totally true, and maybe it doesn't matter, because the part that matters is that it's better to be brave and bold and inquire rather than to believe that one can never make any progress in inquiring into questions. So it's sort of, the way that I understand it is philosophy can fail in a bunch of ways. One way it can fail is just people have to go away from the conversation. That is, they can't keep talking for whatever reason. And yes, myths can sometimes do a little bit of patching up there, but the more fundamental answer is you just try again. Like you try again with someone else, you try again with that person later. This isn't a project for one lifetime. It's going to take a long time. And so, you haven't maybe fully succeeded in convincing Callicles and Polus and Gorgias, but you'll get another chance with Thrasymachus later. I think it's mostly like, if you think there's nothing else, if you think the unexamined life is not worth living, then there's no choice but just to try again.
I'm not. I have a different question, which I already had my question asking time, so I'm gonna step back.
Okay, I really want to answer Sylvia's question. She's right there.
We've been talking a lot about how people start or don't start pursuing philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it is to do with like Socrates phrasing those untimely questions and inciting that. And like, what happens if you don't have a Socrates? How do you start to answer those questions, or at least to ask them?
Yeah, I tell a story in my book of what happened to me when I was an undergrad here, and I didn't have a Socrates. And so I thought what I would do is try to be Socrates. I was like, it's fine if I don't have Socrates didn't have a Socrates, right? But he was just going to be the Socrates for other people. And so I thought I would do that. And so I was like, well, I need to go to the Agora, but I'm living in Chicago. I was undergrad here. There's no Agora here, but there is the steps in front of the Art Institute. That's where people hang out. This is back in the day when there was not a second entrance to the Art Institute. So everyone hung out on those front steps. There were just people there all the time. So I went there. I went to the steps in front of the Art Institute, and I walked up to people. I was like a senior in college. And I said, do you want to have a philosophical conversation? And, okay, the amazing thing is they mostly said yes. Like I expected them to say no. I expected that to be where it would go wrong. But actually they said yes. And so I'm like, great. You've just been to an art museum, or you're about to go into an art museum. So like, what is art and why do we go look at it? Ask him this question. And now, here's how this goes in a Socratic dialogue, right? Socrates walks up to someone. He's like, what is X? The person's like, this is super easy. I have an answer for you, Socrates. And Socrates is like, no, that answer is wrong for this reason. And then they try again. And then they're off on this inquiry, into the nature of whatever. And that is not what happened to me. People just got really uncomfortable. And kind of they seemed upset with me, and they seemed scared of me, and like, what is she up to? And they didn't know how to get away from me. Like they wanted to just like let me get out of this, away from this crazy girl. And I tried again, and it just failed like one time after another. Okay, so my first attempt to be Socrates just didn't work. It was like me trying to say another sentence. Like sometimes someone else does something, and you're like, I can do that, and then you do it, and it doesn't work for you in the way that it worked for the other person. So that's a non-answer. I tried that as my answer, and I think that. I think I'm like still trying to figure out the answer to that question today. I'm like, okay, how do I do that thing, but not make people scared of me? Like that's a really important part. Socrates managed that, right? That took skill. And I think it's a little hard to describe, but I think it's like, what you end up learning how to do is like, you see that in a lot of your everyday conversations with people, like you might be talking about a movie or like one of your teachers or whatever, there's like a little bit more space than you thought there was. There's like a little bit of space to think in that conversation. You're like, wait, but like, why are you thinking that? And like, well, maybe you've got this backwards. And there's like a little room for you to push back. And it's basically like, we just kind of don't notice that space is there all the time. And that when you try, like Sylvia, you and I had a conversation, right, at a dinner party where we were like kind of discovering, okay, like this question about like, anger and apology and restitution, like we were kind of finding a little bit of space there to talk about it and to come up with answers, right? And that it's like that space is there all the time, and you kind of have to probe for it. And I think that at the beginning, you have to go to the places where it's easiest to find, right? And then eventually you can try and do it on a stage in front of a lot of people, or with total strangers standing, who have no connection to you. Like I was like jumping into like hard mode basically. But I think like if I had just been better at it, I could have done it on the steps in front of the Art Institute.
Here I do have something to say, which I think that it might just be a difference in approach in the way that we think about starting shared inquiry. maybe also I'm not as brave as Agnes to go to the steps of the art museum. But for me, I find shared inquiry most common and easiest with a certain kind of book, like an excellent book. And uh, reading books with other people is the main way in which I pursue shared inquiry. Uh, Books raise fundamental questions. They raise untimely questions. And you have a bit of space to recognize yourself or to not recognize yourself, and to let it hit you, and to live in this world and see what it presents to you. And it's also, it's it's very hard to find someone like Socrates. It's very hard to even find really excellent teachers sometimes. But a really good book, you can usually find someone to read a book with you. And then when you're reading books with a group of friends, I think these kinds of conversations happen more naturally. So anyway,
I totally agree with that, actually. Like, here's finally we agree on something.
finally we agree on something.
Which is that, like, a book does create the space, actually. Like that's a way to create the space. It's like we read this thing in common, and so we can like talk about, like, it's part, like that space is now part of our conversation, and we're like allowed to talk about it.
I think even, I'm not as good as this as some people are, but I think even you can get into a kind of conversation with the author who's dead and all you have is the book. Like, it's not as good as with a living person, but also the dead people are sometimes have thought a lot about things, and you can learn a lot from talking to them, even if they don't talk back in quite the same way.
That, like, power, when it comes down to kind of getting what you want, and when that comes down to it, that should really just kind of be knowledge, and
Doing what you want, but yes.
doing what you want. And I was wondering what Socrates and maybe what you would say to the argument that there are things worth wanting that you can't just get from knowledge, like for other people to act virtuously, or like world peace, or like other people to have education and access to knowledge. And so while knowledge and self-mastery are great, it's also worth pursuing the power to influence other people in ways beyond just your words.
It's a good question. So if power is the ability to do what you want, and then Socrates thinks that power is knowledge, then what do we make of the case where, let's say, you want other people to be well off? I think he would say that you have power if you have the knowledge of what you can do to make them better off. That is what power does, is it makes what you do align with what you want, so that you do what you want to do. Now, you might think, I always do what I want to do. Like, I'm here because I want to be here. I eat because I want to eat. And Socrates is like, no. You always do what you think you want to do, but you're a lot of the time wrong about what's actually going to get you what you want, or even what you in fact do want. Because what you want is the good, but you might be confused about that. You might mistake something for the good when it isn't the good. And so let's just say that really it's the case that helping other people is the good for the moment, hypothetically. I think Socrates kind of doesn't think that's right, but that's immaterial to this particular argument. Then power would be acting in such a way that you actually promote that. Not just that you believe you promote it, not that you believe you're doing your best, but you actually promote it. And like, imagine that suppose I really want to like bring about this positive effect for this group of people. And suppose there's like a lever right over there that I could pull that would do that, right? Socrates is like, look, power would be knowing that that's what I got to do, is pull that lever. But usually it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Usually it's a lot of different things that you can do. And, maybe only some of it is in your power. Maybe some of it is stuff you have to do to be able to get into the position to do the other things. Well, power for Socrates would just be knowing all of that. If you had power, you would always act in such a way as to further your ends. And Socrates thinks that's a matter of knowing how to further them.
I have a more serious thing to say about this, but I can't resist. So is Socrates also powerful as well as virtuous? And So because
You would have to have knowledge to be powerful. You would have to
Right.
like know.
But is there
what is
anyone
what-
who's done more than Socrates, if you count the influence of his student Plato, to help people to learn and grow in knowledge and wisdom?
No, but still, that might just like, you know what? At the end of the Lakeys, he says, "The one thing I do not advise is that we remain as we are," and he includes himself in that group.
Okay. So I think what I'm really wondering about, which is maybe more interesting and less of a gotcha, which is always a bad instinct. I don't know why.
No, your earlier gotcha was awesome about like,
That was
no,
a pretty
you
good
know,
one.
that was great. That
Okay.
wait, I want to just flag. Like Zena had this like gotcha thing about, well, if virtue is like all this intellectual stuff and Socrates is doing that, then he has virtue, then he has knowledge, so then he can't be ignorant. And that was a great gotcha because it forced me to be like, actually, here's like to lay out the theory. And that's what refutation does. That's how refutation is the same thing as inquiry.
Okay. What I wanted to say was something else, which is that I think that this kind of question that's raised about whether, I think one of the things about your book and your way of thinking is that shared inquiry looks to be the only good. And I think I'm more and that's part of the difficulty that's created for power is because you think I want power to do other things that are good, like feed hungry people or house homeless people or take care of sick people or all these kinds of things. And I think my own instinct would be less to, and maybe one way of characterizing what might be the difference between us, if you agree, is that something like shared inquiry or the pursuit of wisdom is like a final end. It's a goal that structures your life. It's not necessarily all that you do. And so there's a way, however subtle and complicated, that those other things, I mean, why, after all, do we want to feed people? Because a human life is worth living. What makes a human life worth living? Well, things like the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge. So there's, and it doesn't have to be that pat. There are other ways of going around it. But that's how I would put it. So I find Agnes's treatment a little bit monofocused on shared inquiry as the only possible thing that anyone should be doing at any time. And I'm not sure about that. But I think there are alternatives. And that's the alternative I would suggest.
Oh, I'll just add, like, I basically agree with that, actually. So I don't think shared inquiry cannot possibly be the goal because inquiry is itself an instrumental activity. It's a goal-directed activity. The point of inquiry is knowledge, right? So inquiry is not the goal. Knowledge is the goal. Inquiry is how you pursue knowledge. But I think it's right that, Socrates is just going to grant that our bodies spit out savage commands, and that insofar as we cannot satisfy those commands, that we don't have like basic like food and warmth, etc., we're not going to be doing any inquiring. And similarly, the people around us, if they don't respect us, if they don't make us feel like we belong, if they don't make us treat us as equals, likewise, those savage commands of our groups are very real. They're very real forces in our lives. And part of what it means to inquire with people is to sort of be committed to a group project of getting people into the position where they can inquire with you, because those different kinds of savage commands have been in some sense given their due. And so it is gonna matter that people have food to eat, and it's also gonna matter that people be treated as equals, etc. But from a Socratic point of view, the reason those things matter is because we have a higher calling than those things.
Well, wait a second. Sorry. I can't resist. Sorry. But how, once we have knowledge, do other people matter at all?
No, not at all. Sorry. That's what other people are. Other people are people who will question your answers or people who will answer your questions. But if you had knowledge, you'd be self-sufficient.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about people who do philosophy as a profession. People who
Like us.
Philosophy is a means to attain achievement as well as to pursue knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any kind of like progression there? Do you have that kind of tension? And yeah, maybe really good philosophy can pursue knowledge, not pursue wealth.
So I think that, wealth, money, that's one savage command. It's the savage command of your body. And that's a real worry. Like, are you only, doing philosophy, like, say, to stay alive or whatever? But it's not, I wouldn't say that's the primary one. I think it's the savage commands of the group that are the bigger worry. That is, are you only doing philosophy as a way of maintaining your status, your like place in the world? Like, I'm a respected, look at this, I'm a respected professor. And like, do my colleagues respect me? Do my students respect me? Or what my philosophical activity is sort of like maintaining my social status in a certain way and getting honor in a particular way. I think there's more of a worry about that one than the money one. If you were really into money, you'd probably pick a different job, right? But I think, it's maybe not the same for status. You have a lot of status as a philosophy professor. And I think that, like, if I had knowledge, it would be no problem. Because these other savage commands of the group, I could just like dismiss them. And but of course, if I had knowledge, I just wouldn't care about y'all anyway. And so it would be a whole different game, right? I wouldn't be doing philosophy because philosophy is a pursuit of the thing I'd already have. So as it is, I think it's just a real and standing problem. And I was in an interview in like a few days ago in London in like a little radio studio. And somehow my interviewer in this particular interview just kind of scared me. Like, and I don't mean scared me, like, obviously I didn't like think I was in any danger, but I was like, am I going to look bad? Like, I suddenly had this worry, like, I'm going to look bad in this interview. And I had to like give myself a little speech and be like, this person cannot hurt you. Like all they can do is show you that you're wrong about something, and that's them doing you a favor. Like, if you think them making you look bad is like them hurting this thing called your reputation, that's just an illusion. It's like an illusion that you're on. And like, I had to like sort of say that to myself, and I had to say to myself, like, don't be defensive. Like, the worst thing you can do in this interview is to like be defensive and think that you have anything to protect. You have nothing to protect. Just like, and so what I'm saying is like, that was like a real moment for me where this showed up. And I think that, I think it never really goes away. And it doesn't go away because you start to get like, as you change, I don't know, I used to be a regular old private philosopher, just academic, and now I'm doing public philosophy. And that means I get different kinds of reception of other people's representations of me that I'm having to manage. And like, a lot of people, like when I was signing their books, came up to me and they're like, oh, I'm nervous to meet you. It's an honor to meet you. And I'm like, it's very moving to me to be a person who it's an honor for other people to meet. And I'm like, how do I live up to that, right? And how do I live up to it without trying to protect it? Like, without being like, I can't let them see the real me or something like that. Like, I have to keep telling myself, you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. Just like answer the questions honestly. But it's really that. It's like a constant refrain. It's like my little myth or something that I'm telling myself.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, the question is about, the so-called simple answer to the question is something like, well, if philosophy is your final end, right? That's your final end is something that's the pursuit of wisdom, that's lofty and good. And things like money or jobs are just means to an end. But that's a very tricky, as Agnes is saying, it's a very tricky order to keep. Like, having a final end there's no mechanics for it. And maintaining it is something that requires constant attention, and it's easy to slip. It happens all the time, I think. You can end up with a different final end. That's what corruption means, right? That you slip without noticing into something else. You think it's just a means, and then you find yourself treasuring it. Honestly, like the thing that this isn't the only way to do it, and it might not be the only way I ever do it. I have a job where I make, by choice, where I teach more than I would other places, and I make less money. And for me, that's one way of like keeping myself honest. That is, because I can feel, when you can feel the test, or when you can feel a moment like that, you can give yourself a speech and you can say, I don't care about this. That's a moment where you can feel somewhat secure. But anything can be corrupted. Then you could get really into the vanity. But so you even that can be corrupting. So this is just what life is like, and it's great and hard.
We're all under the impression that Socrates has a lot to say about what's right and what's not. And that in our actions we should try and do, obviously what's right the best and what we can figure out is right and how we can know what is right. So I guess my question is, how can we be sure that what we're doing is right? And maybe it's a bit of a two-parter. When we can't be sure, when is our best not enough?
So you would only be sure if you had knowledge. And so if you don't have knowledge, you can't be sure. So that's the answer. You can't be sure. When is our best not enough? It is always that our best is not enough. Our best is never enough. What's enough is knowledge, which we don't have. Which the result is just we're not good enough. That's what we are, is creatures who are defective, who are imperfect, we're not who we should be. And maybe that's the simplest answer to Zena's first question about why are people feel this so confronting and so upsetting, is that Socrates is telling you that what you're bringing to the table is not good enough. And he can show you how to make it a little bit better. That little bit better is still not going to be good enough. And so basically what you have is a choice between what you're doing now, which is pretty bad, but you think it's good, and what you could be doing if you were doing it with Socrates, which would only be a little bit better and you would realize how bad it is. And a lot of people are like, maybe I want to go for that first thing. Second thing.
Just now you talked about living inquisitively and a lot about knowledge, and I just wanted to ask what exactly is knowledge, and if the quest for knowledge is the end of its own, or is there something that at the end we can describe and we can grasp and we can just be done with it?
Yes, I mean, well, if you had it, you would be done with it. That's what it would be. So I think of, a lot of people think of philosophy as a kind of infinite project or infinite quest where you can always go deeper and deeper, and it's like a journey, and the journey is the destination. And that's not what I think. That's not what Socrates thinks. The destination is the destination. You're trying to get there, and then you're done and you stop. And so there's something you want, and when you have it, you would be done. But it's really far away. What is it? So there's a dialogue about this. It's called the Theaetetus, and they give various attempts at giving a gloss on what it would be for something to be knowledge. And kind of none of them work. So read that if you want a non-answer. But maybe the simplest thing to say is is to make it more concrete with respect to a specific thing. Here's something that I really want knowledge about, that I am daily in pursuit of knowledge about this thing. It is, what are conversations for? I mean, casual conversations. Why do we have them in the way that we have them? Why do we make small talk? Why do we waste our precious time that we have with one another, drifting from topic to topic and gossiping and whatever in trivial ways, instead of just jumping into inquiry all the time? Why aren't we always philosophizing all the time? Okay, this is a question for me. It keeps me up at night. It keeps me right now at the moment where I am in my life is that I'm reading a 1,000-page book, Sociolinguistics of Conversation, to try to understand, okay, what are the mechanics of conversation? How does turn taking work? How do pauses work? So that I can look from another angle at I'm trying to look at the machine conversation. And I feel what I want is to get it, to really understand what it is that we're doing when we're having conversations. Why can't I have real conversations with an AI, a large language model? I try to do it. Before this event today, I fed ChatGPT my book, and I asked it I'm about to be interrogated by Zena Hitz about my book. What do you think she's going to ask me? And how should I conduct myself in the inquiry? And it knew who you were, and it's Zena is probably going to. It gave a decent answer.
What did I ask?
It said that you were going to ask me about the main themes of the book and about no, I mean, it listed the themes, it listed the points in the book, and but that also what it got was There was something about like liberal education and higher calling. I can't give you a good statement because I kind of skimmed it and I'm like, yeah, okay, right. This was not an interesting conversation is what I'm saying. Like, I don't have interesting conversations with large language models. I use them a lot and they're useful, but why? Why can't I have interesting conversations with them? I don't know the answer. I really want to know the answer. So like what I'm saying is here, like this is a quest that I'm on. Like this is my inquiry, right? This is like a road that I'm on. I think about it all the time. I think about it when I teach. I'm like, what are we doing in this classroom? How do we move forward? How do the social dynamics of the interaction, like how do those interlock with the intellectual dynamics? And like there would be such a thing as just me having the answer, and that's what knowledge would be. And I can almost taste it in that case, but that's very specific. It's about a very specific thing that I actually want to know the answer to. So it's huge progress for me to be able to tell you what it is that I really want to know the answer to. That took me years. And so, a big part of the process is like you find out like what is the mystery for you? What is the thing that strikes you as like deeply mysterious and needing to be known? And once you've got your finger on that, you'll start to be like, now I know what it would be to have what I wanted because it would be the answer to this.
I don't know what knowledge is.
My question is if the realization of the importance of knowledge is not knowledge itself because it's not complete, what would that be? And I guess it's part of the second part of the question is, if you come to the realization of the importance of knowledge, does that enact you change or does it bring upon choice? And like, if it brings upon choice, is it because it's important?
Yeah, good. So this is like another way to
repeat the question.
Yes. So I'll repeat one aspect of it, and you tell me if you think there's more to it. There's something that I fixed on because I'm particularly interested in it. But that, what's it like? Is the realization that you need knowledge? Let's say you don't have knowledge yet, but you might be able to realize that you want knowledge, and the question is, how can you like have that clearly without having knowledge, and maybe add to it? There was something else.
Yeah, so the first part was that on like the realization, what is it?
Yes.
It's not knowledge itself. And the second part is having the realization, does that bring choice or does that bring change for someone?
Good.
Like bringing change would be like, is the possibility of choice, does that only exist because it's an imperfect? Because it's not knowledge?
Right. Good. So it seems like the realization that you don't have knowledge is it's both positive and negative. It's both progress and it's also a lack, because it means you don't have knowledge, right? And I guess, so this is like another side of the Socratizing move, which is the realization of that you don't have knowledge is just another name for ignorance, right? And so it's not knowledge, it's ignorance. And it is, if you say like the person what was described earlier who is just posturing, right? And pretending like they have knowledge, that's also like, that's in the same family as the realization that you don't have knowledge, right? It's somebody who clearly values knowledge. They value it enough to pretend that they have it. But the valuing of knowledge that comes with the realization that you don't have it, it's like a little bit further along than the posturing person. So you can imagine it as like a line. And the realization that you don't have knowledge is just like, you're at a certain point in the move towards knowledge. You're farther along than the person who's posturing, who thinks they have knowledge. But you're also like confused about where you are necessarily. If you just, to fully understand like what the value of knowledge would be, you'd have to have knowledge. So you don't clearly and fully understand the value of knowledge in that case. But you maybe understand it a little bit more clearly than back when you were posturing. And so the point is not that it brings choice. The point is not that it's like, oh, well, now I'm going to pursue knowledge because I realize that it's valuable. It's more like you were pursuing all knowledge all along. You were pursuing it back when you were posturing too. It's just that you can pursue it better now, more directedly, less confusedly. Like you're sort of imitating something and you get it more clearly into view. And so it's not that you now suddenly make a choice. It's just that you now can do the thing that you were doing before in a kind of messed up and jumbled way, and you do it in a slightly less messed up and jumbled way. You're slightly more directly like inquiring and pursuing knowledge than you were before.
So this is a case where I think the disagreement might come in, or maybe not. This would be, I think that what happens when you realize how valuable knowledge is you one way of putting it would be to say you fall in love with knowledge. Another would be to say your basic orientation changes. Another way of saying it would be your final end changes to be knowledge. So we had talked earlier about having a final end. I think that there's something, this is something I believe that's controversial, but there's something that you are pursuing that you care about no matter what. You don't always know what it is. So one of the things that can happen in these kinds of conversations is that you can realize that it's not what you think it was or what have you. So I think the pretentious person who I used to be, for instance, so Agnes didn't like The Republic when she read it in high school. I just carried it around and never read it. That's the kind of kid I was. So now it's true that in a way I was paying some tribute to it, but I don't think that I was actually oriented rightly. So I don't think there's a difference in scale between me, pretentious teenager, and me, the person who is I want to know and understand, and I want this is the most important thing to me. I don't think it's a scalar thing. I think that's a moment of conversion. So that's what I was talking about earlier with Mr. Baldwin, that to have one final end and then another one is not a scalar change. It's a conversion. It's a switch, and that can be hard to see because you don't always see it happening one way or the other. It can happen gradually, but I don't think it is itself a gradual thing. It's at some point the switch goes the other way. So I would call it being well-oriented. I would call it like being happy, because you've got the right thing in your view, and the rest of your life can fall into a certain kind of order. And that's, you have your life is still complicated and difficult, so all your problems go away, but you have understanding what you really care about and endorsing it is a very valuable, it is basically what happiness is. Anyway.
I know we keep talking about this question, but I'm curious about, you gave this example at the beginning about you're walking to class and you know how to get there, but someone asks you and maybe you don't exactly know. And so there's this passage in at the end of the Meno, they kind of come to the conclusion that there's no real, there's a difference, but one is not better than the other between right opinion and knowledge, right? That having knowledge versus always acting the right way, they're not really functionally different. They're both kind of the same. They're both kind of good enough. And so I know that you talk about savage, what do you call them?
Commands.
Savage commands, right? And those might sometimes be wrong, but how do you know that they're always wrong? And also, what if they're right? Why do you need knowledge and not a good enough idea that always gives you the right savage commands? What if you can approximate it close enough that you're still always right?
Great. So you're very much right that at the end of the Meno, Socrates says, as we studied in class, that true opinion is as good a guide to action as knowledge. If you want to go to Larissa and you have a true opinion of the way to get to Larissa, that's going to get you to Larissa, and so will knowledge. And so then they're like, yeah, wait, why do we need knowledge? Won't true opinion be fine? Won't it guide you correctly? And so Socrates does want to say, yes, the savage command might be correct. In fact, it's often going to be correct, right? Actually, you should eat when you're hungry generally, because you'll die otherwise, and you can't do much philosophizing if you're dead. So it's not like these are always wrong. And in fact, what other people think about you really does matter. You need to maintain your place in society, because those are your fellow inquirers, right? So these commands they're being savage is not they're being wrong. They're sometimes wrong, and they waver, right? Your body will be like, eat another cookie. And then like 5 minutes later, you shouldn't have eaten that cookie, a stomach ache, right? The savage command of your kinship group will be like, be nice to everyone in your kinship group. Above all, be nice and don't hurt anyone. Like, but now they hurt you. Oh, like all bets are off. You got to make them pay. So these savage commands have specific problems that make it be the case that they don't stay still, they don't stay stable, so that like they go away. In effect, their guiding power goes away. And you might think, well, what if we just kind of cleaned them up? Like instead of going this knowledge route, right? What if we took the command of the body? And what if we made it stop contradicting itself? Welcome to Epicureanism. Okay, that's what Epicureanism is. It's the philosophical theory that takes the savage command of the body and tries to take away what makes the body bad at commanding you. For instance, the fact that it only thinks about the current moment. But what if we thought diachronically? What if we made a calculation over pleasures and pains for all times? This is what Epicureans want you to do. And then you might be like, well, wait a minute, there's still a problem, even if you're an Epicurean, because like, what about other people, right? My pleasures and pains matter, but so do yours. Okay, skip forward a lot of time and you get to what's called utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is advanced Epicureanism. It is a further cleaned up version of the savage command of your body that says, look, maximize utility for everybody, do what's best for everyone, bring about the best set of consequences. Utilitarianism gets further cleaned up. Okay, it shows up first in the 19th century because it's further cleaned up in the 20th, 21st century into views like consequentialism. But the basic idea, the basic underlying thought is take the savage command of the body and take away everything that makes your body a bad guy. Now let's go to kinship. Savage command of kinship tells you be angry, get revenge sometimes. What if you had a kinship command that was cleaned up of that? Where you were going to treat yourself as a member of a group, but in a kind of purified way, in a kind of way where you're never going to get revenge, and you're going to treat yourself as kind of a member of like a group in the broadest and most abstract sense. So it's not just like the local group that you're a part of, but in a sense, you're a citizen of the world, a citizen of the cosmos. You're a cosmopolitan. This is Stoicism. Stoicism is the cleaned up version of the savage command of the kinship group. And later, in the 18th century, Stoicism is going to get further cleaned up by the Stoic, Immanuel Kant, who's going to tell you, look, what it is to be a good person is to be a kind of member of a certain kind of self-legislating kingdom where you have respect for yourself as the kind of thing, i.e. as the member that you are. So Kantianism, deontology, later purified further into contractualism, is an attempt to take the savage command of your kinship group and make it be a workable rule for living. And these are the ethical theories we have today, right? That's what we've got in ethics. We have Kantianism, utilitarianism, and then we also have virtue ethics, Aristotelianism, which says we can take these two commands and harmonize them into one via the pursuit of the noble habituation. I won't go into big details about that because I'm giving you a really long answer, but this is a big part of the book, okay? A big part of the book is to say, actually, we kind of can do this. We kind of can take these savage commands and clean them up and turn them into guides for living. And they're not so bad. So you want to know, does philosophy ever make progress? Look, I just spelled it out for you. Yes. That was huge progress to go from the savage command of the kinship group or the body as Socrates encountered it, and to get the Epicurean or Stoic, reimagining of it, and then to further get it reimagined through, hundreds and hundreds of years of philosophy to the point where we can start to treat these things kind of as guides. That's philosophy making progress. But Socrates thinks, yeah, but there's an alternative. There's another road that you can go. You don't actually have to clean up these savage commands. A thing you can do is inquire into these questions. Now, whether you're going to want to inquire versus going with one of the other systems, that's a little bit going to be a question of like, how compelling do you find these systems? How compelling do you find trolley problem cases and cases where we like don't know how to pick between them? And also like going back to the Meno, I think like how plausible do you find it that we really can just ask ourselves these questions and make progress on them? And like there's a way in which the Kantian and the utilitarian, they do not command you to philosophize. They don't tell you you're a bad person if you don't do philosophy. They tell you what makes you a bad person, and none of it involves philosophy, right? It involves like not maximizing utility for other people, or it involves like treating other people as a means and violating categorical comparative. This does not say do philosophy. So the Socratic approach is like, to be a good person is to do philosophy. That's intellectualism. And, you know, and that's sort of predicated on the thought that you can do philosophy, which is to say you can actually come up with answers to these questions. So that's what it looks like to value knowledge in a particular way. But there's a way in which I want to say, I don't want to overclaim, like my book does not refute those other two theories. I think they're standing there as real alternatives that somebody could find compelling. Of the three theories, let's not forget Aristotle.
Earlier you were talking about untimely questions, and I was wondering, is there a most significant untimely question, or one that kept, I guess, recurring in your life that required you to focus on?
So I sort of gave my example of it, which is like, what are conversations for? And like, what are we doing when we talk to each other? And it goes a little broader, like, do we ever really understand each other? And like, let's get an example of like how this shows up in my life. Like I spent most of today planning a new course for next year. Somehow this has turned into an advertisement, but I'm teaching a new course next year called Human Heterogeneity. And it's about like people being different from each other. Like we're not all the same. We're actually pretty different. And we sort of play act as being the same. We role play, you know, we adopt roles. We make our faces look like the face they're supposed to look like. And we try to fit in, and we try to be the person other people want us to be. But some of that gets in the way of our really talking to and really connecting to one another. And I'm like, maybe I'll understand this better if I teach a class on it. And like, I get a bunch of students to help me with it. So this is the fundamental untimely question of my life at the moment. It's not been the only one. Like the one about politics was really big for me, like when I was writing the book. That's how I ended up with 2 chapters on politics. I was really, really thinking a lot about politics. I think starting to do public philosophy and being like, I've always been kind of an apolitical person, but like doing public philosophy made me realize I can't be apolitical actually anymore. Like I have to be politically engaged in a certain way. And I had to navigate, what does that mean for me? And that was a really hard question for me to figure out. But so that was big for me like 3 years ago. But at the moment, yeah, like I want to be like, why is it that I mostly hate dinner parties? Like I want to love dinner parties. I want them to be like amazing sources of conversation, but I so rarely can make them be that. And I feel like it stands in the way of my loving my fellow man. Like real philanthropy is like learning how to love being with people, which is to say learning how to make the interaction work. And I often fail to do that. And so that's the big question for me at the moment. We can take one more question.
Given that the foundation of much of Socrates' thought is sort of this rationalist dialogue, this sort of discourse. You bring up Kant earlier in his sort of, critique of pure reason, and even, going back to, Hume and all this sort of criticism surrounding, trying to simply reason things out. How can we build a true knowledge when sort of our logic around the world is so clearly flawed in many ways? Even, baseline arguments like cogito ergo sum have serious problems. So how can we build a knowledge through sort of discourse if, it can be flawed in so many ways?
Is that a more narrow question about like the limits of reason? Would you put it that way? Or am I putting words in your mouth?
I think limits of reason might be. There are limits of dialogue in general.
So I think it's just very right that our tools are flawed, and we're doing this inquiry, like each of us is pursuing an inquiry into an untimely question with certain kind of attachment to certain answers that are going to sway the way that we conduct the inquiry. And maybe the thing to say is just like, there's no alternative. Like you might think, well, but in my back pocket, I've got this other thing. And that's like where knowledge is, or that's like a source of, like think about what Socrates is saying. I'm calling for a vote from one man alone. It's like, seriously, you're calling for a vote from Polis? Polis is going to be the arbiter of like, whether you've made a good argument or not. And Socrates is like, that is how desperate I am. I've got to call for a vote from Polis. Polis is who's in front of me. Polis is who I'm talking to. And that's it. And I think it's like, we all hoped that we could have something quite a bit better than that. We all hoped that somewhere there was like sitting there like the book of the truth, or like the pure logic, or something that would ensure that we don't go wrong. And on a Socratic picture, we're just like a lot more desperate than that. And so we have to use this very flawed method to make very slow progress because there's nothing else. And I think Socrates says, if you have anything else, please give it to me. I would love to do anything but this as a way of moving forward. I would love not to just have to move forward by way of like conversations with whatever random people are around me who are in a lot of ways ignorant, who kind of hate me, who are eventually going to kill me. Like, this is not a great way of proceeding. It's just that there kind of is no other way of proceeding. Now, after Socrates, some people thought, no, there are some other ways of proceeding. Namely, my head is like pretty good. I'm pretty good at thinking, quite a bit better than people around me. Let me just go and sit and figure this out. And then I'm not going to be beholden to the likes of Polis. And there's something to that, actually, I think. Like, why are we reading Descartes and Kant and Hume, if not for the thought that they're kind of good at that and they're worth engaging with? But I think that even so, like Descartes and Kant and Hume, what are they doing? I mean, what is Descartes doing in the Meditations? He's like talking to us, right? And he is like convincing us of something. It's a very dialectical text. It's dialectical with the reader and also with himself in a weird way. And, he is finding that he has to try to make intellectual progress using damaged goods, namely his own mind that has been filled with falsehoods and with where he doesn't feel like he can trust anything in it. And, he thinks, okay, but I figured out a special way to proceed where I can now be safe, right? I can find one sure thing, one sure Archimedean point, namely that I exist. And then that is unquestionable. And I'm going to be able to build everything on that. And let me start by building the existence of God on it. Here's an awesome proof that everyone's going to believe. A lot of my students who've just had that proof are just like, yeah, you screwed up, Descartes, because that proof doesn't work. Even Descartes, like, he then gives you another proof. So, and so it's like, he's doing his best to like think for himself. And where'd that get him, right? Well, not nowhere, but somewhere where we feel like we still have a job to be like, I have to engage with this and I have to improve it and correct it. And at the end of the day, it's just one flawed mind engaging with another.
I want to say something in response to this, but then I think Agnes has to have the last word because it's her book. So maybe we could figure out a way to do that. But I do want to say something about this. I don't want to have the last word at her book launch. But it does seem to me, and it goes back actually to the question about right opinion and what Agnes was saying to that. My own view is that, starting with the Enlightenment, and we still are haunted by this in a certain way, there's a lot of attempts to try to manage various problems of human life and systematize them out of existence. And I think that type of management in general is, this is a very broad brush, irresponsible thing to say, but I think those types of management in general don't work. So I have a much lower opinion, for instance, of contemporary ethical theories than Agnes does. Like, I think they're trying to manage something that can't be managed. And they're trying to systematize something that can't be systematized, and they're looking for like rules and results for things where there aren't rules and results. And I think that Descartes and Hume and Kant are really trying to do that for a reason. So they're trying to clean up reason, get rid of all the junk that's flawed and doesn't work so that they can just have a kind of pure, perfect science. And I think that project is a failure. I love those thinkers. I learn a ton from them, and there's questions about them that haunt me. Like, how on earth is nature mathematical? Like, this drives me crazy. That's what keeps me up nights is nature. Could nature be mathematical? But I think that one of the reasons why I love Plato and Aristotle and the figure of Socrates is that I don't think that I think that for them, reason is really a human capacity. I think they're aware of quite a lot of its limitations. For instance, limitations that I was trying to point to in my questions, like the role of the passions, like the role of commitments, the role of like life just seems to me like it reason fits in a very craggy, complicated, arbitrary, contingent space in human life. But I do think that they have a picture of just the and I think what Agnes says is right. Like there isn't any alternative. You have to use it. But you can also learn about what its limitations are. That's one of the things reason can do. That's one of the things that's amazing about it, is you can think about and be aware of ways in which it can go wrong, and then you can get better and better at using it, and then, maybe you can make some progress. But you can't systematize away, I don't think, all of its flaws. Okay, so now someone find a way to give Agnes the last word.
We'll take one last question.
Okay, so you brought up the anecdote of your pursuit of knowing the reason of conversations. And then, we also talked about how we make progress for just developing philosophy. But I guess what I haven't heard you go at length about is just how our perspective on conversations and just pursuit of knowledge changes if there is no end limit, or if there is, or if there isn't, how does that change how we are pursuing knowledge?
Yeah. So I think that if there is a limit, then the story you have to tell yourself is like an easier story to tell. Like, it seems to me that if there's no limit, then you have to tell yourself some really complicated myth, basically. And I think some people do that. Like the people I know who are like, philosophy is infinite, still manage to do philosophy because they're philosophers. I don't know how they manage it, that it's an infinite project. I'm like, I don't get it, but they must be telling themselves some complicated story. And I'm like, this is another project of mine that I'm just starting to work on, is like to try to investigate like the myth of the infinite quest, and like, is that a real thing? Is it a myth? I mean, is it really a myth, just like a Platonic myth, where it's like a set of kind of stories you tell yourself to make the quest be possible for you to continue in the present? That's what I tend to think it is. And the simple story is just, no, it's a finite quest. We've made progress on it. But 2,500 years is not that long for such a hard problem. I mean, give us like maybe 10,000. That seems reasonable. And maybe it's like one difference if you think about it that way. Like, I think of it like if it as a sort of 10,000 year quest. Then there are other things about human life, like environmental catastrophes. It's like, we gotta fix those because we need to be around for 10,000 more years, right? It's not enough if we're around for 100 more years. This is not a 100-year question. It's like a 10,000-year question. I mean, we're counting the 2,500, so, but still, 100 is not enough. And so if you see it as finite, then you see it as like part of the project that we're all engaged in. And it's embedded in like our institutions and our like, do we actually have the conversations that we need to have is relevant to like, are we making progress on it? Like, it's not just infinite quest of like, then it almost like, for me, again, you're hearing the voice of somebody who doesn't believe in the infinite quest. I'm like, it almost doesn't matter whether we have a conversation because it's infinite anyway. But I'm like, no, there's something we're actually trying to do, and there are really big stakes, and we got to actually do it, and we got to organize our whole society, organize our universities, like organize our everyday conversations, our families, everything's gonna be organized around this so that we actually get it done. Yeah. Okay, let's stop there. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Zena. One quick announcement, which is that our next Night Owls this quarter is on February 2nd, and it's after this. It's philosophy of basketball, and it's after the second basketball game of that day. Okay, so it's an experiment, new thing we're trying out. It's in the basketball arena, court, whatever. Okay, it's where they do basketball. We never done this before, so please come. All right. Oh, and if I didn't get to sign your book, I will sign it now. So please come to me and let me sign your book.